a paper came out that showed they could divide the two different types of Parkinson's by the bacteria in the gut. And I was like,
Wow.
Eureka, that's it. I quit my job and I started funding some research. And about 6 months later, founded a company called the BioCollective.
Hey everyone, Melanie Johnson here with another great episode of Elite Expert Insider. Today we are talking health. I don't know about you, but it seems like it's been a trend about people having a hard time with gut issues. I'm being one of them. My son this year has struggled with all kinds of gut issues, gone to all kinds of doctors, and your gut affects so many different parts of your body. So if you're having trouble with brain fog, if you're having trouble sleeping, if your stomach is just every time you eat feels like, ugh. So we're going to go into all of that today. I have Martha Carlin here, and she was self-taught to solve her husband's problem of having Parkinson's disease. And she's going to walk through her background, give us some solutions and products and things. So I'm excited because I know I want to sleep better. I know I don't want to have brain fog anymore. And all that affects your hormones, your cholesterol, everything. So Martha, thanks for coming today. I'm so happy that you could come in and join our interview.
Thanks for having me, Melanie. I'm excited to talk to you about all of these important connections to our gut.
Well, tell me your background because I didn't realize you started as an accountant. I was reading some of your bio and I thought, oh, well, she has a science background. So this just goes to prove you can teach yourself anything, right? We have all the tools to learn things today. So tell us, how did you end up where you are right now?
Sure. So my background was in accounting. When I came out of college, I went to work for Arthur Andersen,
Yeah.
which was one of the big 8 accounting and consulting firms. And I was an auditor. And as an auditor, they teach you to never take anything somebody says at face value, to examine the evidence for yourself. So they teach
Yes.
you this kind of natural skepticism and how to look into examining and looking for the truth yourself.
Yeah.
And they trained us in a process of how you look at business risk by mapping out a transaction flow map of everything flowing through the business, who's touching it, what happens.
Yes.
And we would do these interviews to see if the processes were working, and if they weren't, that's kind of where the business risk was. Well,
Mm-hmm.
fast forward to 2002. So that was, 20 years after, or not quite 20 years after I'd gotten out of college. My young 44-year-old husband, who was a healthy marathon running athlete,
Yeah.
was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And I was like, something's not right with that,
Yeah.
because, like, that's an old person's disease. And so I
Mm-hmm.
initially started by saying, okay, well, if I take my transaction flow mapping and kind of overlay that onto the human body, what are we looking at? Well, the main transactions flowing through the body are the food we eat, the liquids we're
Yeah.
drinking. And so I really started looking at food and the food supply. And at the time, actually leading up 2 years prior to his diagnosis, he had been drinking soy protein shakes and soy milk. And at that time, I wasn't really that familiar with genetically engineered food and the chemicals that are used on that. And so I got very interested in soy.
Wow.
And by that time, about 97% of the soy was GMO and had a lot of glyphosate. So I
Wow.
started examining that and really spent 10 years looking at the science of nutrition and the food supply and all of that. And then gradually kind of moving deeper into the scientific research about Parkinson's specifically. And then in 2014, I read a book by Dr. Martin Blazer, who wrote, the book was Missing Microbes, and it was talking about
Mm.
growing up in the age of antibiotics, which we
Yeah.
did. We
Yeah.
grew up a- after antibiotics came into widespread use in the 1950s and 60s. And over the years, kind of increasingly so, were handed out like candy. And
Yeah.
what he showed was that these chronic diseases we're now seeing were potentially connected to our exposure to antibiotics in the food supply and in our own medical treatment, and this thing called the microbiome. And I'm like, what's the microbiome? And of course, that's the, bacteria, fungi, viruses that live in and on our body, and they function like our internal pharmacy to maintain our health. So they are making vitamins, hormones, neurotransmitters, kind of running all the background systems of
Yeah.
digesting our food and delivering what we need. And later that year, they a paper came out that showed they could divide the two different types of Parkinson's by the bacteria in the gut. And I was like,
Wow.
Eureka, that's it. I quit my job and I started funding some research. And about 6 months later, founded a company called the BioCollective and started collecting poop samples, fecal samples, and doing genetic sequencing of those, looking for patterns across the population. So, not
Hmm.
just Parkinson's. And then, over the course of all of that research and building computational models, ultimately developed probiotics to restore the loss of function that we're seeing from these exposures over time.
Wow. A couple things that hit note with me was number one, the soy part. This was probably 11 years ago, 12 years ago. She was heavy into soy because it was promoted for menopause, that women, it helps with estrogen. And we went away for a day to the beach and she got me a soy chai tea, and she made soup with all the soy in it. Everything we had soy in it. And the next day I came home and my stomach was upset and I passed out cold, and I was like, what the heck? And I really attribute it to that soy, having so much at one time that it really messed me up. And I thought, I'm not doing anything soy after
Yeah.
that, you know? So I get that. And then the other thing is, how do we know? I read also about the poop samples. I think you have the largest sample of poop in the world that you've collected more than anywhere else. I find that very interesting because a lot of times they weren't doing that before, and it's really a new way to see what's going on. And so tell us, when someone wants to get started down this journey and they're feeling like, I'm a little off, I feel like I'm not digesting right, what's the first thing they should do to identify if I do have good gut health or not?
So, I mean, there are another number of companies that do gut health testing. So,
Hmm.
there's Microbiome Labs is probably one of the longest running ones that
Yeah.
I think has some pretty good tools for assessment. There are also Genova Diagnostics. So, if you're working with a practitioner, so
Yeah.
depending on the severity of your
Yeah.
gut health problems, it's a good idea to work with a functional medicine doctor or
Yeah.
somebody who has more experience looking at
Yeah.
gut health and looking at those tests. Because what we found when we were doing these sequencing reports and stuff, we're giving people a 60-page report of all the things in their gut, and they would take this printout to their internist or something who would just kind of look at them with crossed eyes.
Yeah.
So it's still a pretty new field, despite the fact that it's been 10 years since I founded the company, in terms
Yeah.
of understanding what bacteria are there. So much of the research has been on who's there and not so
Yeah.
much about what are they doing. And so,
Right.
finding a good report and somebody who can interpret that report for you can be helpful, but there's often just some good general advice to kind of take a step back and look
Yeah.
at your diet. Are you, do you have gas problems, bloating when you eat, and start to look at what are those foods? Often it can
Hmm.
be dairy. We've got a lot of contamination in the dairy as well because the cows are eating GMO feed, and that comes
Yeah.
across in the milk. Grains can also be a problem. And again, I think a lot of that comes back to how they're dried using
Yeah.
those same herbicides. And,
Hmm.
if you can step back away from those and lower your intake of processed food and processed sugars, people will often see significant improvement just from those three steps in the process. And,
Yeah.
for
It's
me,
hard.
like bread, I love bread. I've always been a bread lover, but back, even before I started the company, I used to get like fibroid tumors in my breast. And
Yeah.
so every time I would go for a mammogram, it would be like, oh, we've got to do, another, we've got to look again. And then they would say it was nothing. Well, as soon as I stopped eating bread, boom, They were gone. And I
Wow.
told the doctor that, and she said, "Oh, that's not related." Okay, well, I've never had another one since I stopped eating bread. So, okay.
It's so true because the doctors haven't caught up with everything new that's going on and the holistic part. They are still in their traditional part. My son, who's had tons of gut problems this year, he just found out he had an ear infection, and his general practitioner gave him a Z pack. And he said, "But what about my stomach? Like, what should I be doing?" "Oh, you should be fine." I'm like, "What? No, like there's probably things you should be doing to protect your stomach now that you're taking an antibiotic again." And I think that's how his problem started, was too many antibiotics that he was given over the course of a year that caused some of this problem for his stomach, you know?
Well, and that can often, so I don't know if you're familiar with C. difficile, but a C. diff infection is often caused by repeated courses of antibiotics that kills all the bacteria except
Mhm.
for the Clostridium difficile. And then that's what causes more and more severe gut problems. And actually, one of the products that we ended up making is a product called the antibiotic antidote. And
Ah,
in part, that came out of there was actually a study out of the Weizmann Institute in Israel that
yeah.
they had studied this 11 strain probiotic after antibiotics, and it actually made things worse. And so I sat down with my chief scientific officer, and we were looking at the formula, and he said, "Well, the problem with this formula is it's not balanced for pH. And so it's going to make the gut very acidic, and you're not going to be able to have a broader colonization." So we have
Mm,
this computational modeling we do to figure out how the team of bacteria will work together. And
mhm,
we put together a team of bacteria that modulates the pH so that you can get a broader colonization after the exposure to antibiotics. And we're actually just starting to work on the clinical trial parameters to look at that in a before and after clinical trial. But we've had a number of people who were on V antibiotics for, a month or longer than a month, or have,
mm,
had a Z pack or something like that, who have come
yeah,
back and said, wow, this made such a difference. So, and doctors just, because they're not trained in the microbiome, they're still, even
yeah,
10 years after all this research, our conventional medical school training is
yeah,
not training much about the importance of the microbiome. And we're 2/3 microbial in terms of our
yeah.
cell
And think
population.
about it, like, you get all this data, but then you don't have anyone that can interpret it for you and tell you how to solve the problem. You're like, "Great, I got all this data, but I don't know how to read it, and I don't know what doctor to find that really knows how to understand it." So it's like finding that needle in the haystack, especially if you don't live in a big city. I imagine there's more, like, I live in Houston, so I imagine there's probably a couple people that would be able to do that here. We're a big medical community, but otherwise, it's really difficult to find someone to do that. Explain how your gut affects your brain, your sleep, your hormones, all these other things.
So the hormones and neurotransmitters are made in the gut. So
Mhm,
serotonin, most people know about serotonin, and melatonin. Some of melatonin can also be made in the gut. I mean, it's made in
mhm,
every cell in the body, but
yeah,
serotonin in particular, I think about 80 to 90% of your serotonin is made in the gut. And
wow,
also stress chemicals. So this gut brain axis is that, those neurotransmitters and hormones that are being made in the gut and sending signals to the brain. And
mhm,
it's kind of a loop. So if you get in a stress loop, so let's say we get in mental stress,
yeah,
and that mental stress creates a chemistry in the body, and that feeds a certain profile of bacteria in the gut that then produce more
ah,
chemicals that kind of send you in a loop. And so you want to start to settle that down and calm that down with, microbes that can produce GABA, which is more calming and settling down. And so people don't really understand how these,
yeah,
and they call the gut the second brain. Sometimes I really think maybe it's the first brain,
yeah,
because that's also where, our instincts hit us. We have all this
mhm,
language, gut instinct. Oh,
yeah,
I get butterflies. All of
yeah.
that is that chemistry between the brain and the gut.
And and stress and anxiety and depression is so rampant today. It's almost like it's like, we used to get back in the day, if we got a little cold or something, it's like this a chronic disease that people have now. And then it is, like you say, it's interesting that it is affecting the gut when you're having stress. And like I look at my 25-year-old son, he's a high stress, high anxiety person. And so that's direct correlation. And he's had people tell him, you need to meditate, you need to relax, you need to do things that will do that, and that will help your gut. And I think he thinks it's voodoo stuff. Oh, it doesn't really, no, that's not true. And but I love that you're verifying that it is the true, it's true that you'd recommend people taking time to make sure they de-stress.
Sure. And so one of those kind of loops too, it's shown depression can be directly initiated in an animal model or in a human. They've shown it in
Yeah.
humans too by injecting something called endotoxin.
Hmm.
And there's a study, I think, where they injected endotoxin, and within, I think it was less than 30 minutes, the symptoms of severe depression. Well, endotoxin is actually produced by the cell wall of gram negative bacteria. So those bacteria in the gut, if you have a lot of gram negative bacteria, as they're growing and dying off and growing and dying off, they're
Hmm.
releasing endotoxins. And that can be, basically bringing down your mood. It can also be affecting your
Yeah.
blood sugar. There's many different disease models that are modeled off this endotoxin, which is inflammatory, and inflammation, the inflammation gets to the brain and has
Hmm.
all kinds of impacts.
So it's really sounding to me it can go both ways. Your brain can affect your gut, but your gut can also affect your brain.
Absolutely.
So, how often should we check up on our gut? I mean, we do physicals, right? If you're staying on top, you're getting your blood work done. How often should you check your gut health?
Well, that's a really interesting question because I do see a future where looking at your gut health will be part of that annual process, but
Hmm.
I'll say it's generally just a snapshot, like a blood test is a snapshot of a point in
Yeah,
time. But what they have shown is that generally we establish a stable population of kind of
yeah.
who we are by the age of 3. And so
Wow.
even with disruptions and things, you will generally move back to your stable phenotype. But they have also shown that by changing your diet within a week of changing your diet, say you move to a ketogenic diet or you move to a high
Hmm.
carb diet, you
Yeah.
can change the population in your gut like that. So I do see a future where some form of looking at the microbiome will be part of that process. But there's actually a couple of companies. There's one called Biome Sense that is
Hmm.
has a device, I think, that you can put on your toilet that
Oh,
can
wow.
do some measurements. And it's been a while since I've looked at it, so I don't remember exactly what it's measuring. And then I just talked to a friend last week who is working with a company that's actually working on some underwear with a sensor that, because the gas actually, you can tell depending on whether the gas is, say, methane or hydrogen sulfide or
Yeah.
what that gas is, you can connect that to actually which bugs are in the gut and whether or not they're problematic. So I
Oh my
think there will
gosh.
be some easier ways to have clues. And there's a device called the food marble where you can say you eat a meal and you wait, I think it's like 30 minutes, and you blow
Hmm.
into it. And if you're producing, it can measure whether you're producing methane or hydrogen. And that will tell you if, certain foods you're eating are feeding certain bacteria that you might not want to feed.
Well, I like that one better than having something in my underwear. I don't want something like I've got electronic on my wrist. I wear the Aura ring, and you got your phone in your hand. Now you got something on your behind too.
Yeah.
I just,
Yes. Well, I used to be a slave to my Apple Watch. And then one day I woke up and I said, okay, this has taken control of my life and my fascination with all my numbers. And I got rid of it.
And you know what? This is a weird thing about my watch and my Aura ring. I've got to think of what it is. Anyways, I've got like neuropathy on the left side of my from shingles. So I've leftover like neuropathy on the left side of my body. And it was really like just getting like, God, I think maybe I need to go to the doctor. Maybe there's like something like, a tumor or something in there because this is really radiating. And I decided to stop wearing my watch and the ring, and it is dissipated by 80% by not having the electronics on my hand. And I thought, gosh, that's interesting. And I did see some video where someone had an Aura ring on and they did some kind of test of their mobility with and without it. And I thought, that's what made me try taking it off. And I feel much better.
Well, because it's sending a Bluetooth signal, so you're getting interference electronically, which I think it's underappreciated. All these devices people want to put on, continuous glucose monitor, or all of these things
Yeah.
are, the body, the bacteria in the body, and our cells are impacted by electromagnetic waves and the
Yeah.
different frequencies of a ring or a watch, our telephone, our phone. I try
Hmm.
to, when I take my walk in the morning, if I take it with me and think I try not to take it, but sometimes I,
Yeah.
and then I try to put it in airplane mode. So at least I'm not getting as much of the electronic
Yeah, like
waves.
I can't have it near my head. When I do it, I can feel like it bothers me. Let's dive into sleep a little bit. I took a look at your sleep supplement and I was like, I don't recognize anything in here because usually it has like L-theanine, it has magnesium. And I was like, I don't recognize any of these things. So I want you to tell me about them.
So, we design teams of bacteria to produce in your body those metabolites that support sleep. So,
Yeah.
but they do need certain amino acids. So, the simple slumber is the formula that we develop for sleep. And the group of bacteria in that increase the production of bacterial melatonin and also of tryptophan. And both of those
Hmm.
are will help you sleep. And so the whole concept there is you are kind of putting back the system that you might be missing that would naturally
Hmm.
produce those things instead of, taking a bunch of synthetically produced analogs, if you will, to try to mimic what your body should be doing for you. And it's
Okay.
it's definitely it's a product, when people try it, and it doesn't work for 100% of people, but
Yeah.
when people try it, they know, pretty the first night or two, they will know this is going to work great for me or it's not going to work for me. And we have a money back guarantee. And then we actually just came out with a new product. It's not even
Yeah.
up on the website yet. I think August 1st it'll be up, called Perfect Peace. And
Uh-huh.
that's one of those for, since we talked about stress, for, increasing that sense of calm and
Yeah.
helping to support the production of GABA, which sort of settles down the excitatory system and gives you a sense of calm. And I got my sample bottle last week and we were all laughing. We all got our bottle and we said, okay, we're going to take our first chill pill. And I really did notice kind of a greater sense of just general Zen peacefulness after taking it. So we're excited to see what people have to say about that.
And I've been drinking something called Recess at night that relaxes me. But again, I think it's still like the magnesium, type of product versus, what you might be talking about. So, and
Well, magnesium is pretty important, and where
mhm,
most people are pretty low on magnesium. It
yeah.
Magnesium is critical to running about 300 enzymes in the body.
Hmm.
So if you don't have sufficient magnesium, you're not going to have, well, the appropriate enzymatic action to produce a lot of things. And our water systems, because of our water treatment and all of that, we used
Yeah.
to, we used to get water that was running over rocks and giving us minerals. And, our
Yeah.
water now coming out of commercial treatment plants is, it's quite a different profile than what life used to be 100 and 150 years ago.
Yes, some are even saying like most waters. I saw what's the guy from High School Musical, that actor, he's done a whole thing on he's like most waters aren't doing anything for you. Some might even be hurting you
Mhm.
what you're drinking. So you think you're doing something good for yourself. It's so hard to discern what is good, what is not good, even when you're trying to do something good for yourself. Then you find out you're not. Because it's, oh, I'm drinking more water, but it's not the right water. It's not spring water. It's, purified water, and there's nothing in that water that's probably not even good for you. It's a whole
Yeah,
different
it's a lot to
conversation.
keep up with. Yeah, it's a lot to keep
It
up with.
is. It's overwhelming. Talk about your sugar product that you have, that the sugar shift. I have such a hard time giving up sugar. Yeah, it's definitely an addiction, and I'm the worst at night. So explain what this does and how it decreases your sugar and carb cravings.
So the concept for this actually came from going to a Parkinson's meeting where they showed there's a sugar alcohol called mannitol, and they
Uh-huh.
showed a study in animals where that sugar alcohol could actually scavenge the proteins that are known to cause Parkinson's and pull them out of the
Yeah.
brain of the animal. And I was like, oh, wow. So I came back and I started studying mannitol chemistry, and I found that, there's bacteria that convert glucose and fructose into mannitol. And that's actually where the whole concept of putting these systems back in the body came from.
Yeah.
And of course, our diet, the Western diet, is just loaded with glucose and fructose. And
Mhm.
when we're under stress, we actually produce fructose endogenously in our body. So the concept was to put together a team of bacteria that could convert that excess glucose and fructose into mannitol, which is a free radical scavenger, and you just pee it out basically. So, and it's kind of a food for a broader microbiome. So it has all these mechanisms in the process. And I originally made it for my husband, who had some great results with it, but we started sharing it with other people, and they're like, oh, I don't crave sugar anymore, or my A1C dropped. So we actually did a clinical trial in diabetes 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And we also measured endotoxin, because that endotoxin is also a driver of insulin
Mhm.
resistance and diabetes. So we had a significant drop in endotoxin during the 90-day study period, and a continuing group that went on for a full 180 days. Almost 100% of the endotoxin was gone.
Wow.
At that 180-day point, the HbA1c dropped 14%, and the insulin dropped, and something called HOMA-IR, which measures your insulin sensitivity, that also improved, statistical improvement. So all of those showed that this mechanism of the bacteria converting those sugars is having an impact on insulin resistance, your glucose metabolism, and then just overall energy. So a number of different markers. And we could also see in the before and after, we looked at the microbiome. It had returned the gut to, your gut is supposed to be anaerobic, and it
Ah.
had returned the gut to an anaerobic environment. And then that actually fostered the return of some very important bacteria like bifidobacteria, which is what we're supposed to be colonized with as babies. And a lot of people have lost that. So, it had a lot of downstream benefits beyond just kind of restoring a
So is
healthier.
this for a normal, like my A1C is 5.9, so I know I need to probably get that a little lower. How is it different than taking like metformin or berberine?
Well, I mean, they have different mechanisms of action. And metformin, to me, I mean, it's an interesting medication, but I think it can be damaging to your mitochondria from a
Mhm.
long-term perspective. Berberine, I think some of the mechanisms from berberine are probably also dealing with the endotoxin producing bacteria. I have to look at
Mhm.
that again. But that's an interesting, I mean, I guess herbal or plant-based
Yeah.
remedy that typically you want to not take something like that all the time. You want to kind of rotate it in and out. But, our mechanism is kind of a whole metabolic working system. And
Mhm.
those are more like, if I think about how most of our pharmaceuticals, or even a single nutraceutical,
Mhm.
they're single molecules often. And
Yeah.
so you're putting single molecules into a complex system. And our approach is putting a team together that makes a lot of complex molecules, and we model how they work together to produce what you ultimately want.
To me, it sounds like the other one is just like, hey, we're going to lower this for you. Yours is like, we're going to fix it so it stays this way. Like it's something is causing this. Your gut biome is off. Let's repair you. So yours
Right.
is reparative, restorative
Right.
versus just like, hey, this is just going to strip out whatever you need. It's kind of, that's how I think yours is much more restorative, might be the word for
Yeah,
that.
that's a great way to say that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I might have to try that.
I'll have to use that.
Yeah. Yeah. Use that word.
Well, when we get done, you can send me your address. I'll send you a bottle.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, I would love that. I would love that. Well, tell people where they can find you. I think you gave so much great information today. Can they connect with you, connect with your website?
So for the products, you can connect with me on biotiquest.com, biotiquest.com. And I also have a lot of blog content there about gut health, about fermented foods and natural ways to take care of your gut health. I have a Parkinson's blog where I talk about the Parkinson's science and gut health, and that's called Martha's Quest. So if you know anybody
Mm.
with Parkinson's, please share that. And I have a Substack that is also called Martha's Quest, where I write about a lot of these different pieces. So,
Terrific. Well, everyone check that out. And thanks for being on today, Martha. And if you're interested in becoming an author and a #1 bestseller, reach out to us at eliteonlinepublishing.com. That's where we help authors write their book, publish their book, and market it. We'll see you next time. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye. Hey, are you looking to increase your revenue, build credibility, and elevate your brand? This podcast is brought to you by Elite Online Publishing, an innovative publishing and full spectrum marketing company. They will publish and market your book to make it a #1 bestseller. Becoming an author is the best way to market your business. So contact them at eliteonlinepublishing.com today. All of their authors become #1 bestsellers.